"You paid for this body, Cowboy," the Apache girl said, "but I obey no price." Then the rancher. The land stretched dry and pale in every direction, broken only by low brush and scattered rock. Even the wind seemed tired. Dust clung to his coat, his boots, and the reins in his hands. His horse walked slower than usual, saving strength. Water had become more valuable than money that year. He finally saw the trading post just past a shallow ridge, a cluster of wooden buildings that leaned slightly from years of wind. A faded sign swung on rusted chains, creaking in the silence. Normally the place bustled with wagons and voices, but today only 2 mules stood tied near the rail, heads low. Daniel slid down from the saddle and patted his horse's neck. "Almost done, girl," he muttered. Inside, the air smelled of old coffee and leather. The trader, Harlan Pike, sat behind a counter covered in papers. He looked up with tired eyes that sharpened the moment he recognized Daniel. "Mercer," Pike said, "you picked a hard season to be shopping." Daniel removed his hat and wiped his forehead. "I'm not shopping. I'm trying to keep a ranch alive." Pike leaned back in his chair. "Same thing these days." They spoke for a while about the drought, about cattle wandering too far for grass, about ranch hands leaving for railroad jobs that paid steady. Daniel had already lost 2 workers that month. Another planned to leave before winter. "I can't run the place alone," Daniel admitted. "I need help, even just one steady pair of hands." Pike rubbed his chin slowly, thinking. Then he glanced toward the back room. "I might have a solution," he said carefully. "Not a hired hand exactly, but someone who needs a place and owes travel cost. Work could settle the debt." Daniel frowned. "What kind of arrangement?" "Debt bond," Pike said. "Common enough. You cover expenses, they work it off." Daniel hesitated. He didn't like complicated deals, but he was running out of options. "They willing to work?" Pike gave a half shrug. "Strong, capable, just needs direction." After a moment, he called toward the back. A long silence followed, then soft footsteps approached. A young woman stepped into the doorway. She stood straight, not timid, not curious, simply present. Her dark hair was braided and tied with a thin strip of cloth. Her clothing was worn but carefully kept. Dust marked the hem where she had walked many miles. She did not look at Pike. She looked directly at Daniel. Pike cleared his throat. "Her name is Taza, picked up with a relocation group that scattered north. Been here a week. Won't stay, won't travel alone either." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "She understands English." Before Pike could answer, she spoke calmly. "Yes." Her voice was steady, neither soft nor sharp. Daniel nodded slowly. "You're willing to work. Ranch work is hard." She studied him for a moment. "Work is not the problem." Pike quickly laid papers on the counter. "Travel, food, supplies, you cover the cost. She works until it equals the amount. Fair trade." Daniel read the paper. The writing was cramped but clear enough. It listed expenses, transport, provisions. No mention of ownership, only repayment. He looked at her again. "You agree to repay by work?" She answered after a pause. "I agree to balance what was taken for the journey." That sounded reasonable to Daniel. He signed. Outside, clouds gathered far away but offered no rain. He saddled an extra horse Pike provided. Taza mounted without assistance, adjusting the reins with practiced hands. The trader watched them leave, saying nothing more. The ride to the ranch took most of the afternoon. They traveled in silence except for hooves over dry ground. Daniel tried a few times to speak about distance, about water ahead, and she answered only what was necessary. As the ranch buildings appeared on the horizon, smoke drifted from the cook shack, and 2 workers hammered at a fence line. One of them, Jacob, shaded his eyes. "You finally found help?" Daniel nodded. "She'll be working here for a time." The men stared openly. Taza dismounted and looked around the ranch, the corrals, the water trough, the barn. Her gaze moved slowly, measuring, noticing. Daniel pointed toward the bunkhouse. "You can stay there. We eat near sundown." She did not move. Instead, she walked toward a cottonwood tree near the edge of the yard and set her small bundle beside it. Daniel followed. "The bunkhouse is more comfortable." She shook her head once. "I will sleep here." "You don't have to stay outside," he said, confused. "You're part of the ranch now." She met his eyes. "You paid for travel and food," she said. "Not for where I sleep." Her words were calm but final. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. The ranch hands watched from a distance, whispering. He suddenly realized he did not understand the arrangement as clearly as he thought. "All right," he said carefully, "but work starts early." She nodded once. As evening settled, the air cooled slightly. The workers gathered for supper. Taza accepted water but refused the meal, choosing instead to prepare something small from her own pouch. She sat apart but not hiding, simply separate. Daniel lay awake later that night, staring at the ceiling of his cabin. He had expected a worker who would follow instructions like the others. Instead, he had brought home someone who followed a different set of rules entirely. And he had no idea yet how those rules worked. Morning came early on the ranch. The sky was still gray when Daniel stepped outside, pulling on his gloves. The air felt cooler than the day before, but the dryness remained. He expected to wake the new worker, yet she was already up. Taza stood near the horse corral, her hands resting lightly on the top rail. One of the younger horses paced nervously inside, kicking dust. The animal had been difficult for weeks, refusing a saddle and nearly throwing Jacob the last time he tried to ride it. Daniel watched quietly. She had not noticed him. She moved slowly, not entering the corral right away. Instead, she circled it once, speaking softly in words Daniel did not understand. The horse's ears flicked toward her voice. After a moment, she opened the gate just enough to slip inside. Jacob stepped out of the barn and froze beside Daniel. "You sure about this?" he whispered. "That one bites." They both waited for trouble. None came. Taza did not grab the reins or reach suddenly. She stood beside the horse until it stopped moving away from her. Only then did she lift her hand and touch its neck. The animal tensed, then settled. Minutes passed. Finally, she led the horse calmly to the rail and looped the rope once around the post. Jacob let out a low whistle. Been fighting that animal 2 weeks. Daniel nodded but said nothing. When breakfast time came, the cook called everyone. Taza washed her hands at the water barrel but again refused the cooked meal. She ate something small from her own supplies and drank water. The men exchanged glances but didn't comment openly. Afterward, Daniel handed her a list of tasks. Fence repair along the south line, then help carry feed sacks. She read the list, then looked toward the well. Without a word, she picked up 2 empty buckets and began walking there instead. Daniel followed. "The fence needs fixing first." She kept walking. He stepped ahead of her path. "You heard me." She met his eyes calmly. "Water is first." "The fence keeps cattle from wandering," he replied, trying to stay patient. "And cattle live because there is water," she answered. For a moment he had no response. The well trough was nearly dry after the herd drank overnight. The fence could wait an hour. He stepped aside. She worked steadily, hauling bucket after bucket, never rushing yet never stopping. By mid-morning the trough was filled and the horses had gathered around it. Only then did she take the tools and walk toward the fence line. Jacob shook his head beside Daniel. "She don't take orders like the rest." Daniel watched her in the distance. "No, she doesn't." Days passed in a similar pattern. Taza worked hard but chose the order of tasks herself. She repaired broken tack with surprising skill, cleaned hooves carefully, and noticed small injuries on animals before anyone else did. But she ignored certain chores entirely. Cooking, she refused. Cleaning cabins, she refused. Sleeping indoors, still refused. One evening, Daniel tried again to explain. He spread the contract paper on the table and pointed at it. "This means you work under ranch direction until the cost is repaid." She studied the paper for a long time. Her finger traced the writing, though she already knew what it said. "It says I repay what was spent," she replied. "Yes," Daniel said, "by following ranch work." She shook her head slightly. "By giving equal effort, not obedience." The difference frustrated him more than open defiance would have. She was not lazy, she simply rejected authority itself. The workers grew uneasy. Around the fire, they spoke quietly. "She thinks she's equal to the boss," one muttered. "Town will say you bought her," another told Daniel. Daniel rubbed his temples. "I didn't buy anyone, it's a work debt." They shrugged, unconvinced. A week later, an old traveler arrived, a former army scout passing through for water. He watched Taza handling a skittish mule with ease. "Apache," the scout said softly to Daniel. "You can tell," the scout nodded. "More than that, she knows you ain't her chief." Daniel frowned. "I'm her employer." The scout gave a slow half-smile. "Not in her world." In her thinking, a trade was made. She balances trade, then leaves. Orders don't count unless she agrees. Daniel looked toward her. "But the law, territory law might back you," the scout interrupted gently. "Her law won't. You're both living on the same land with 2 different rules." That thought stayed with Daniel long after the scout rode away. Later that afternoon, a storm threatened in the distance, dark clouds rolling but giving no rain. The cattle grew restless. Daniel hurried to prepare the herd for possible wind. He called for everyone to bring them toward the lower pasture. Taza instead began opening a second gate leading uphill. "Wrong direction," Daniel shouted. She pointed toward the horizon. "Wind comes from south. Dust flood fills low ground." He hesitated, then trusted his habit and ordered the men downward anyway. The storm hit at dusk, not rain but heavy dust wind. The lower pasture filled with choking dirt. The cattle panicked and scattered. Hours were spent regathering them in darkness. By morning they were exhausted. Taza had moved the horses uphill before the storm. They stood calm and safe. No one argued with her that day. The summer grew hotter as the weeks passed. Grass became thin and pale, and the ground cracked in long lines across the pastures. Daniel spent most days riding the boundaries, counting cattle again and again to make sure none had wandered off searching for water. Every animal mattered that season. By now the ranch had fallen into a strange rhythm. The workers stopped questioning Taza's methods, even if they did not always understand them. She still chose her own order of work, but the results spoke for themselves. The horses had grown calmer. Tools were always where they should be. The water trough never ran empty anymore. Yet there was still distance between her and the others. She spoke only when needed. At night she sat near the cottonwood tree while the men talked near the fire. She was not unfriendly, just separate, like someone visiting a place rather than living in it. Daniel had begun to accept it. He no longer tried to force conversation. Instead he watched and learned small things: how she studied the sky before sunrise, how she listened to the wind across the grass, how she seemed to notice movement long before anyone else. One evening, as the sun dipped low, she walked up beside him while he repaired a broken saddle strap. "Tracks past West Fence," she said. Daniel looked up. "Cattle," she shook her head. "Horses, 3, not ours," he frowned. Strangers traveling through land wasn't rare, but riders cutting near ranch lines often meant trouble. "How long ago?" She pointed toward the fading light. "Before midday." He stood uneasy. "Why not say earlier? You were counting cattle," she replied simply. "You would not listen yet." He almost argued, but stopped. She was right. He would have dismissed it hours ago without proof. "Tomorrow morning we check it," he said. She didn't answer, just walked back toward the tree. The next morning they followed the tracks. Jacob and another hand rode with them. The prince led across rocky ground where Daniel quickly lost them. But Taza didn't slow. She studied small shifts in pebbles, broken stems, tiny marks Daniel could barely see even when she pointed directly at them. After half a mile she stopped. The trail turned toward the North Hills, an area known for hiding places among the rocks. Jacob swallowed. "Horse thieves pass there sometimes." Daniel felt a knot tighten in his chest. Losing cattle was hard. Losing horses would ruin him. "We head back," he decided. "No point chasing ghosts without proof." Taza looked once more at the ground, then nodded. 2 nights later the proof came. The ranch dogs barked sharply after midnight. Daniel woke instantly and grabbed his lantern. From the corral came the sound of hooves pounding in panic. By the time he reached the yard, shadows were already moving beyond the fence line. Riders disappeared into darkness, driving several horses ahead of them. "Stop!" Jacob shouted, but the thieves were gone before anyone could saddle up. They counted quickly, 4 horses missing, including the young trained mare Daniel depended on for breeding. The loss felt like a hole in his chest. The men argued about chasing immediately, but the night was too dark and the ground too open. Daniel knew a blind chase would only exhaust them. "We track at daylight," he said heavily. He turned to look for Taza. She was not there. At first he thought she might still be near the tree, but her blanket and bundle were gone. Only faint footprints remained in the dust leading toward the northern hills. Jacob exhaled slowly. She left, same direction. No one said the word aloud, but the thought settled over them. She had known about the thieves, and now she was gone. Morning came with tired silence. The workers prepared horses anyway. Daniel did not stop them, but he already understood the trail would be too old by the time they found it. Still, they rode north. After 2 hours, the ground turned hard and rocky. Tracks vanished. The men circled in frustration. Jacob kicked a stone. "We'll never find them now." Daniel stared across the hills. He felt anger, disappointment, and something else, not quite belief that she had betrayed them, but not understanding either. They returned to the ranch with fewer horses and heavier thoughts. 3 days passed. Work continued because it had to. The cattle still needed water. Fences still broke. But the place felt emptier, even the animals seemed restless. On the third afternoon, a distant shape appeared along the ridge, one rider, then several shapes behind it. Jacob shaded his eyes. That's our mare. Daniel stepped forward slowly as the figure came closer. It was Taza. She rode calmly at the front, leading a rope tied to the stolen horses. Dust covered her clothes and hair, but her posture remained steady. No greeting, no explanation. She stopped in the yard and handed Daniel the rope. He stared at the horses, all four returned unharmed. "Where did you?" he began. She set something in his hand, the folded contract paper. "I found them," she said simply. "Far north camp, they run when watched." "You followed them alone?" Jacob asked in disbelief. She nodded once. Daniel looked from the horses to the paper. "Why give this back?" She met his eyes. "Debt is finished," she said. He frowned, confused. "Finished? The value you lost is returned," she explained. "More than travel cost. Balance is made." For a long moment no one spoke. Wind moved softly through the yard, carrying the smell of dust and sun-warmed wood. Daniel realized she had not run away. She had completed what she believed was fair exchange. And now, by her understanding, she owed him nothing at all. The afternoon felt strangely quiet after the horses were returned. The workers gathered around the corral, still amazed. They checked each animal carefully, running hands along legs and backs, making sure nothing was hurt. Jacob shook his head again and again. 3 days, and she brings them back like she just went for a ride. No one laughed. The moment felt too serious for jokes. Daniel stood near the fence, holding the folded contract paper. The same paper he had signed weeks ago now felt heavier than before. He looked at Taza, who had already stepped away from the group and was rinsing dust from her hands at the water barrel. "You could have told us where they were," he said. She did not turn. "You would have ridden fast, they would have run faster." He realized she was right. A large group chasing them would have pushed the thieves farther away. Her quiet tracking had worked better than force. Still, the paper remained in his hand. "You think this settles everything?" She faced him calmly. "Yes." Before he could answer, the sound of wagon wheels approached from the road. A small cloud of dust followed a buggy climbing toward the ranch. Beside Daniel, Jacob muttered under his breath, "That'll be town trouble." The buggy stopped near the yard. A man stepped down wearing a coat too warm for the weather, Sheriff Collins. Behind him sat another familiar figure, Harlan Pike, the trader. Pike's sharp eyes moved quickly from the workers to Taza, then to the returned horses. "Well now," Pike said, forcing a smile, "seems my missing property was useful after all." Daniel's jaw tightened. "She isn't property." Pike ignored him and addressed the sheriff. "That's her. I reported unpaid transfer. The rancher kept her without settling the agreement." The workers shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke. Sheriff Collins removed his hat slowly. "Daniel, I have to ask questions. Paper says you took responsibility for her cost." Daniel held up the contract. "It was a work debt. She repaid it." Pike snorted. "She ran off with thieves and came back. That doesn't clear purchase." Taza stepped forward before Daniel could respond. "I did not run. I returned value." The sheriff looked surprised that she spoke so directly. "You understand the complaint?" "Yes," she said. "He claims ownership." Pike spread his hands. "Not ownership, compensation. If she won't stay, I'm owed payment again." Daniel's anger rose. "You already charged for transport once." "And you signed," Pike replied quickly. The sheriff raised a hand. "Enough, this goes to a hearing in town. We settle it proper." 2 days later, they rode into the small town courthouse, a simple wooden building with benches worn smooth by years of use. A few townspeople gathered, curious more than concerned. Matters like this rarely happened openly. Daniel stood beside Taza while Pike spoke first, repeating his claim that the original cost had not been repaid according to written agreement. The judge, an older man with tired eyes, listened quietly and then looked toward Daniel. "Did you sign this paper?" "Yes," Daniel answered honestly. "And did she leave your service?" Daniel hesitated. "She never agreed to serve in the way written here." Murmurs moved through the room. The judge turned to Taza. "You wish to speak?" For a moment it seemed unusual, but he nodded permission. She stood straight, hands relaxed at her sides. Her voice remained calm, steady enough that everyone could hear. "I was taken to travel north," she began. "Food and supplies were given. He paid cost for that journey." She gestured toward Daniel. "I said I would give work equal to the cost. I gave care to animals, repair to tools, and returned horses taken by others. The value is greater than the paper price." The judge leaned forward slightly. Did you agree to stay under command? She shook her head. I agreed to balance trade, Pike interrupted. That's not how contracts. The judge lifted a hand again. Quiet. He looked toward the workers who had come as witnesses. Jacob spoke nervously but truthfully about the horses being recovered and the work she had done. Another hand confirmed she never tried to escape, only worked in her own manner. The room grew still. Finally, the judge folded his hands. The written agreement is unclear. It describes repayment but not forced service. Without proof of harm or theft, I cannot declare a person property. Pike's face reddened. So I lose my cost, the judge replied calmly. You charged once. The debt was reasonably repaid through labor and recovery of livestock. Claim dismissed. A soft wave of whispers moved through the benches. Daniel felt tension leave his shoulders for the first time in days, but the judge added one more sentence. She is free to go wherever she chooses. Outside the courthouse, the sunlight felt brighter than before. The workers waited near the horses while Daniel and Taza stepped onto the boardwalk. Pike climbed into his buggy without another word and drove away. Daniel looked at her. So, that's it, she nodded once. Yes. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, there was no paper between them, no obligations spoken or unspoken. Only choice remained. They stood there a long moment, neither quite sure what to say next, while the town slowly returned to its normal quiet around them. They rode back from town in the late afternoon. The road stretched long and dusty, glowing orange under the lowering sun. No one spoke much during the journey. The workers rode ahead, giving space without being told. Daniel and Taza followed behind at an easy pace. The decision from the hearing had settled the matter clearly. There was no paper anymore, no debt, no claim. Only a simple truth remained: she could leave whenever she wished. Daniel kept thinking of what to say, but every sentence sounded wrong before he even spoke it. So he stayed quiet and let the sound of hooves fill the silence. When the ranch finally came into view, the cottonwood tree stood the same as always, its leaves moving gently in the evening wind. Taza guided her horse toward it without hesitation, as if she had never been gone at all. She dismounted and untied her small bundle from the saddle. The same bundle she had carried since the first day. Daniel stopped nearby. You're leaving tonight? She looked toward the southern horizon for a long moment. Soon. The answer was honest but uncertain. The workers gathered near the barn, pretending to check equipment while clearly watching from a distance. No one wanted to interrupt the moment. Daniel rested his hands on the fence rail. Winter will come early this year, he said carefully. Travel will be hard. She nodded once. I know the land. He paused, then tried again. You don't have to hurry, you can stay a few days, rest. She studied his face, as if measuring his meaning more than his words. You offer kindness, she said, not obligation. Yes, he replied. Your choice only. That seemed to matter. She set her bundle down near the tree but did not pack for departure that evening. The next days passed quietly. Without the tension of the contract, the ranch felt different. The workers spoke more easily around her. Jacob even asked how she calmed the young horses. She showed him patiently, guiding his hands instead of doing the task for him. Daniel noticed she laughed once, a short, soft sound, when the mule nudged Jacob into a water bucket. It was the first time anyone had heard it. She still kept her habits, waking before dawn, checking the animals, walking the fence lines alone. But now the distance felt like preference rather than barrier. One morning, Daniel found her studying hoof prints near the pasture. Anything wrong? He asked. She pointed. This one favors the left leg, small stone caught earlier. He examined the hoof and found exactly what she described. After removing the pebble, the animal walked normally again. He shook his head slightly. You notice everything. She looked at the grazing herd. Animals speak. People often don't listen. The words stayed with him the rest of the day. A week later, cold winds began arriving from the north. The grass turned brittle and the nights grew sharp. Daniel knew travel season was closing. That evening he approached her near the cottonwood tree carrying a small leather pouch. I wanted to ask you something, he said. She waited. I can't offer contracts anymore, he continued. I don't think they work for either of us, but I can offer wages. He placed the pouch on a stump nearby. The faint sound of coins came from inside. Work when you want, leave when you want, teach the horses what you know, no ownership, no debt. She didn't touch the pouch. For seasons only, he added, not forever. She looked toward the darkening hills, then back at the ranch, the barn, the water trough, the horses resting calmly. "Why?" she asked. Daniel considered before answering. "Because the ranch is better when you're here, and because choice matters." The wind rustled the cottonwood leaves above them. She lifted the pouch and weighed it briefly, not opening it. Then she set it back down. "I will go south before deep winter," she said. "Find people who traveled from my home." Daniel nodded. "I understand." She continued, "When the grass returns, I may come back." He felt relief he didn't show on his face. "The offer stays." Winter passed slowly. Snow never fell heavily, but the cold lingered long. The ranch survived the season with fewer losses than expected. The horses remained calm, almost as if remembering her training. Spring came with cautious green across the plains. One afternoon, Jacob spotted a distant rider approaching from the southern trail. He squinted. "Looks familiar." Daniel stepped outside. The rider came closer, straight posture, steady pace. Taza. She rode into the yard and dismounted beside the cottonwood tree like she had done many times before. "You found your people?" Daniel asked. She nodded. "Some, enough." He gestured toward the barn. "Work's waiting if you want it." She gave a small, approving look at the herd. "I know." From that year forward, her visits followed the seasons. She arrived in spring, left before winter, always by choice. The workers came to rely on her skill, and travelers began speaking of the ranch known for unusually well-trained horses. Daniel never wrote another contract. Payments were simple and fair. No paper needed. People passing through often asked who owned the horse trainer. Daniel always gave the same answer. "No one does." And under the cottonwood tree, where her first night had been spent in quiet refusal, she continued to rest whenever she returned, not as someone bound to the ranch, but as someone who chose it.